In the early months of World War II, a routine surveillance operation led to an unanswered mystery after 80 years. The U.S. Navy blimp L-8 took off from a tiny airport on Treasure Island, an artificial island erected in San Francisco Bay for a recent World's Fair, at 6 a.m. on August 16, 1942. Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody and Ensign Charles Ellis Adams were on board. 5 hours later, the L-8 crashed on a residential street in Daly City, California, scraping roofs and electrical wires. Local firefighters fled a fire in the hills to race to the scene, extinguish flames, and rescue the airship crew. But they soon realized there was no one to rescue. Both pilots disappeared from their spacecraft. 5 hours later, the L-8 crashed on a residential street in Daly City, California, scraping roofs and electrical wires. Local firefighters fled a fire in the hills to race to the scene, extinguish flames, and rescue the airship crew. But they soon realized there was no one to rescue. Both pilots disappeared from their spacecraft. Aviation expert Dan Grossman thinks biplanes were ideal for coastal surveillance. They could stay in the air for long periods of time, fly slowly and at very low altitudes, hover over targets, and operate in low visibility and cloud ceilings, which fixed-wing airplanes of the time could not do. Goodyear created the L-8 as a promotional blimp. The Navy moved it and 4 other L-series blimps to Moffett Field in Santa Clara County, California, which already had numerous massive airship hangars, in early 1942. Other L-series blimps visited Lakehurst, New Jersey, the 1937 Hindenburg crash site. Cody and Adams were skilled airship pilots. Cody, 27, graduated from the Naval Academy in 1938. Adams, 34, was commissioned as an officer after nearly a decade in the Navy. He survived the 1935 USS Macon wreck and drowning off California. Cody ordered machinist's mate James Riley Hill off before the L-8 departed Treasure Island. Hill thought Cody was worried about the weight. The first 1.5 hours of the trip seemed unremarkable. At 7:50 a.m., the men radioed that they were inspecting an oil slick in the sea, which may indicate a submarine. They disappeared from public view. The Navy deployed aircraft to find the L-8 when it didn't report back. Fears calmed when a neighboring military installation claimed the blimp had landed and 2 pilots had escaped. But this was incorrect. Instead, the blimp landed on a beach a mile distant. No one was on board, witnesses stated. They attempted to stop it, but it rose again and headed toward Daly City. Daly City police and fire rescuers discovered the blimp's control vehicle door open, but no fire or damage. The ship's radio worked, and both men's parachutes were intact. One of the blimp's anti-submarine depth charges was found on a neighboring golf course. Except for the 2 guys, their life jackets, nicknamed Mae Wests after the bosomy actress and comedian, were gone. Pilots wear life jackets in flight, so that was expected. The mystery intensified as investigations continued. Many people watched the blimp because fishing boats and Navy and Coast Guard ships were in the seas around San Francisco that day. Investigators believed the blimp dropped 2 smoke flares over the oil slick to indicate its position before rising to a higher height. A Pan Am Clipper seaplane saw it fly. A search aircraft saw it at 2,000 feet, double its typical altitude, before it plunged back into the clouds. On the ground, hundreds of witnesses watched the deflated, deformed airship glide through the heavens. A subsequent witness called it a big broken wiener. Some onlookers captured images that authorities tried to seize. As usual, witnesses presented conflicting stories. Some said they saw no one on the balloon. Using binoculars, a horseback rider saw 3 persons. Other witnesses saw guys parachuting. Navy searched San Francisco seas for days. One hopeful notion was that Cody and Adams were rescued by a ship that was keeping radio quiet. The men and their life jackets were never located. Many ideas surfaced after the catastrophe, and for decades. Japanese grabbed the guys. They defected. A stowaway killed them. They died fighting for a lady. Aliens kidnapped them. Many experts now believe they fell out. Maybe as one tried to fix something outside the ship and lost his balance. Then the other tried to save him and fell too. The Navy supported that theory, but called it a matter of conjecture. Some say one guy fell from the balloon and the other dived into the water to help. This theory is rejected by Grossman. He thinks it is certainly possible that both officers accidentally fell into the ocean. If one officer fell, the other would have stayed in the blimp to radio for help. The radio worked, and mark his comrade's location. Navy men instinctively avoid abandoning ship unless necessary. Yes, don't give up the ship is the U.S. Navy's unofficial motto. L-8S returned to Navy duty after repairs. The control vehicle returned to Goodyear after the war and became part of the Blimp America. After the Blimp retired in 1982, the control vehicle transferred to the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida, where it remains. Museum admission is limited to Department of Defense ID holders. The L-5 control vehicle from a happier Blimp is in the Smithsonian's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia. Grace worked at Ravensbrück, Auschwitz-Birkenau, and Bergen-Belsen as a Nazi concentration camp, Helferin. She was called the Hyena of Auschwitz and Beast of Belsen for her Birkenau crimes. After the Allied conquest of Nazi Germany in April 1945, Grace was found guilty of war crimes, including the torture and murder of Jewish captives at the Belsen trial, and hanged. At 22, she was the youngest woman hanged in Britain in the 20th century. Grace was first rejected by Ravensbrück's training program. Gebhardt's co-worker told her to return when she was 18, 6 months away. However, she was recruited to work at another dairy farm from March 1941 until June 1942, delaying her homecoming. She began training at Ravensbrück in July 1942. She became Aufseherin after 3 weeks of program completion. She was said to have outperformed her supervisors throughout her 7-month camp job, earning 54 Reichsmarks a month. In 1943, Grace visited her father Alfred, who had remarried in 1939 to a widow with 4 children while wearing her SS uniform. Alfred first liked Grace, who hadn't informed him about her camp brutality. After his stepdaughter cried because Grace had pulled the head and limbs off her doll and his small son jokingly shot Grace's gun at him, Alfred changed his mind. Alfred took his son's handgun and hit Grace. At the Belsen trial, Grace's sister Helene said she had heard their father quarrel because Grace was in the Schutzstaffel, but she had not seen him physically assault her. Grace returned to Ravensbrück soon after the event, her last home, and oversaw labor tasks in the concentration camp until March 1943, when she was sent to Auschwitz II Birkenau. Grace worked as a telephone operator in a Blockführer's office at Camp B at Birkenau after arriving in March 1943. She was sent to supervise a Strafkommando after allegedly violating this task. Capo Helena Copper said that Grace controlled this sector for 7 months and killed at least 30 detainees every day. Grace had many camp assignments during the following 4 months. She supervised a gardening crew in fall before replacing Aufseherin Elisabeth Volkenrath as mail censor in December. Grace, 21, was promoted to Oberaufseherin after doing well. Grace was assigned charge of Camp C in May 1944, which housed 30,000 Polish and Hungarian Jewish women in 31 huts. However, survivor Helen Spitzer-Teichauer testified in 1945 that Grace was unqualified to lead this Birkenau sector alone. She worked with Aufseherin Louise Danz, a fresh transfer from Krakow-Plazow concentration camp. Grace used a rubber truncheon, handgun, and whip to perform most of her violent deeds at Camp C. Survivor Abraham Glinowiecki testified that Grace selected ill and healthy Hungarian Jews for the gas chambers. Survivor Edith Trieger said Grace assaulted and kicked captives fleeing selection parades. Grace often ordered convicts to make sport with harsh punishments. Survivor Olga Lengyel said Grace had sexual intercourse with SS soldiers and male and female Jewish captives at Birkenau. Grace had relationships with married doctors, Josef Mengele and Lagerführer Josef Kramer, but Mengele halted their relationship after discovering her infidelity. A prisoner who was Grace's maid said she had numerous cruel sexual encounters with Jewish prisoners. Survivor Lengyel said in her book that Grease treated her favorite inmates as slaves until she got tired and sent them to the death chambers. According to Birkenau doctor Gisela Pearl's account, Grace had orgasmic pleasure when operating on young women's breasts that had been split open by her whip and infested with lice or filth with a knife and no anesthetic. Pearl said Grease would kick the young lady being operated on if her screaming interfered with her desire. Grace stayed in Birkenau's Camp C until the 18th of January 1945, when all troops were moved westward due to Soviet advances. Grace's last duty was Bergen-Belsen in early March 1945. She was Arbeitsdienstführerin and Rapportführerin for 3.5 weeks. She wasn't meant to go to Bergen-Belsen because Lagerführer Kramer intended to move her dot. She strongly resisted the move because she wanted to remain with her new boyfriend, Oberscharführer Franz Wolfgang Hatzinger, whom Grease fondly called Hachi, a married man 14 years older, Aufseherin. Johanna Bormann said Grease and Hatzinger were very close and regularly sneaked off secretly to have sex during the Belsen trial. Grease recreated Birkenau's cruelties in Bergen-Belsen. She defended forcing convicts to make sport during her trial because she felt they were capable of such physical torment. British soldiers seized Bergen-Belsen on the 15th of April 1945. While Lagerführer Kramer called for surrender, Grace and other high-ranking SS commanders stayed in the camp. Grace was alleged to have seemed haughty when the British arrived at the camp, and got angry when she tried to strike a British officer who entered one of the huts. Being restrained, Grease was detained and questioned for 2 days at the Wehrmacht Tank Training School, 3 kilometers from the camp. On September 17, 1945, Grace's Lüneburg trial started with 44 other defendants, known as the Belsen trials, despite Birkenau being the site of most murders. Grease faced 2 war crimes accusations for Bergen-Belsen and Birkenau between the 1st of October 1942 and the 30th of April 1945. Grease said, "Himmler is responsible for everything, but I suppose I am as much to blame as the others above me." Grease's cold, arrogant, and unremorseful demeanor persisted throughout the trial, with terse answers to questions like, "I should know better than you whether or not I had a dog, don't you think?" And, "I wish you would stop repeating the word regularly," in reference to her repeated attacks on prisoners. Grese's sole weakness was when her sister Helene testified about Irma and their father's heated 1943 conversation, causing her to cry. Helene testified that she did not think Grease could have attacked any inmates, saying, "When females fought in school, my sister never had the bravery to fight, rather she fled away." On day 54 of the Belsen trial, Grease was convicted of both war crimes. As she was sentenced to death, she showed total indifference. All expected pleas from the accused were rejected, thus her clemency application was dismissed. Grease was moved to Hamlin Prison on December 8th, with the other 10 death-sentenced guards from Lüneburg. Gress and 2 other SS women, Elisabeth Volkenrath and Julia Bormann, laughed and sang Nazi songs the night before their execution. 2 women were executed by British executioner Albert Pierrepoint on December 13, 1945. She ended with "schnell," quick, and had no remorse. Since she was the youngest prisoner to be executed at 22, Pierrepoint sought to spare her any kind of trauma by hanging her first. No, according to the original, dated and timed witnesses' declarations of the returned death warrants, Grease was executed second at 10:03, followed by Volkenrath at 9:34 and Julian Bormann at 10:38. The president of the court ordered Gress and the other executed that day to be buried in the Hamlin prison courtyard rather than the cemetery to avert martyrdom. After the British left in 1954, all the bodies were reburied in Friedhof am Veil Cemetery. Bertram Weber's voyage to this charming village, where horse-drawn carts and half-timbered buildings are the norm, was long, painful, and not at all redemptive. Mr. Weber learned 4 years ago that his father was not a young soldier who died honorably on the battlefield during World War II, as his mother had told him. Rather, he had a high-ranking position as an SS officer, where he was responsible for the killings of tens of thousands of people while stationed in the area that is now Western Poland. Mr. Weber's voice was heavy with wrath and sorrow as he stated, "He died peacefully in Argentina, with his old comrades standing at his grave and raising their right arms. A racist will always be a racist." Mr. Weber, who is 63 years old, delivered his tale to a room full of primarily gray-haired men and women. The room was quiet, and although there were some sympathetic nods, there was not much astonishment. The majority of them had their own stories of deception and discovery, personal histories that turned out to be homemade fairy tales, with the grim reality hidden under layers of quiet. These infants are the result of the Lebensborn Program, which was created by the SS to promote Aryan characteristics. On this cold weekend, they came together in a corner of central Germany to tell their memories, and for the first time, to openly discuss the agony of discovering that they had been groomed to become the next generation of Nazi elite. Gisela Heidenreich, a 63-year-old family therapist from Bavaria, whose mother was unmarried and whose father was a top SS commander, a fact she learned later in life, remarked, "This is the opposite example of the Holocaust. The goal was to advance the Aryan race by any means necessary." Lebensborn, which translates to Spring of Life, is the name of a network of clinics located across Germany and its adjacent countries. These clinics were established with the purpose of providing a place for pregnant women, most of whom were unmarried, to give birth in private. The physicians and nurses who cared for them were hired by the SS, which was the Nazi Party's dreaded paramilitary organization. One of these clinics is located at the top of a mild slope in Wernigerode, a little town that is far away from the Harz Mountains. The structure, which has been abandoned for a long time, was part of a sad homecoming tour for the about 40 individuals who showed up for the meeting of an organization called Traces of Life. In order to be admitted into the Lebensborn Program, pregnant women had to have the correct racial traits, which included blonde hair and blue eyes, verify that they had no genetic problems, and provide proof of the father's identification. The father also had to satisfy identical requirements. They had to pledge their loyalty to Nazism and were taught Hitler's beliefs while they were living there. A lot of the dads were SS officers who had families of their own. Heinrich Himmler, who was the leader of the SS, urged his troops to have children with women they were not married to in order to create a German master race. Between 1936 and 1945, around 6,000 to 8,000 individuals were born at these clinics in Germany. Due to the program's secrecy, the majority of people were not informed of the circumstances of their births or the identities of their fathers for decades. This information was not included on their birth certificates. There are still some people who are unaware of the reality. Researchers have only been able to chronicle the Lebensborn initiative in the past 20 years, when the wall of silence that surrounded it started to crumble. They have dispelled certain salacious rumors, such as the idea that these clinics were Nazi brothels filled with blonde-haired women who were prepared to have children with SS men. Dorothee Schmitz-Koester, who has authored a book on Lebensborn, said, "The children were conceived in all the usual ways, love affairs, one-night stands, and so forth." At that time, abortion was illegal in Germany, and in many instances, the women did not want to keep their babies. Some of the moms placed them for adoption with SS families. Some people reared the children by themselves, informing them that their dads had died in the conflict. In post-war Germany, women who had given birth to illegitimate children in a strongly Nazi environment suffered a double shame. According to their children, many people spent their lives in a state of dismal quiet. Some people acquired psychological difficulties or began drinking alcohol. The youngsters also found the revelation of the truth to be equally distressing. Mr. Weber, a creative writing instructor in Berlin, is still having a hard time accepting the roots that he has lately discovered. He discovered the truth after receiving some indications from family members and doing investigation. One of the most terrible things he discovered was that Himmler was his godfather. Ms. Schmitz-Koester said, The majority of them grew up aware that they had a secret. They were upset with their moms because they had been deceived or left behind. Some people feel ashamed. Additionally, there are a few people who take pride in being Lebensborn. They believe that they are members of an elite group. Life was much more difficult for Lebensborn children who were born outside of Germany. For instance, in Norway, which was conquered by the Nazis, the SS set up a clinic because Himmler thought that Scandinavians looked good. After the war, those infants, who were born to Norwegian women and German troops, were labeled as offspring of the enemy and subjected to merciless persecution. In Nazi-occupied nations, other children who matched Himmler's harmful racial criteria were taken from their homes as babies and transferred to Germany, where they were reared by proper Nazi families. If anything, the reunion demonstrated that racial engineering has its limitations. The Germans here looked much like the Germans at any other meeting of older Germans. The males had salt and pepper beards and balding heads, while the ladies wore eyeglasses and had frosted hair. Miss Heidenreich, a tall lady with beautiful blonde hair and sparkling blue eyes, added, "I really am an exception." Miss Heidenreich, the first of the Lebensborn children to publish a book about her experience, claims that the program, despite its dark nature, has parallels in the world today. She points out that with the progress being made in genetics, parents who are selective may soon have the ability to choose the characteristics of their unborn offspring. She said that, in light of such likelihood, the atrocities committed during the Nazi period should not be forgotten and allowed to fade into history. She added, "If we begin to engineer babies with blonde hair and blue eyes, can we only blame Hitler for that?" Even though her parents were German, Miss Heidenreich was born at a clinic in Oslo. Her mother decided to give birth there in order to be as far away as possible from the hamlet in Bavaria, where she had grown up. Miss Heidenreich was not informed about her history, but she grew skeptical after viewing a program on television about the Lebensborn children. Today, she struggles to come to terms with the fact that her mother, who was a devoted Nazi in her earlier years, became a nice person in her latter years. She stated, "She was a wonderful grandmother, even though she was a terrible mother. Not everyone has had a difficult experience." Ruthild Gorgas, who was born here, stated that when she was a teenager, her mother informed her about the circumstances of her birth. Miss Gorgas had occasional communication with her father, who was a manager at a chemical business and had another family. Her mother gave her a picture book that had a record of her time spent at Wernigerode. Despite the fact that she had previously stated her dislike for her daughter's naming ceremony, in which the newborn was put before an altar depicting a swastika, she remembered it as a perfect occasion. In the summer of 1940, Britain prepared for the German army's invasion, with Luftwaffe airstrikes killing and destroying airfields and towns daily. The Luftwaffe lost air dominance due to Royal Air Force Fighter Command's determination, but the German airstrikes were bitter reprisals against Britain. Hundreds of heroic pilots perished, but not all were warriors or adults. But some were innocent children, condemned to suffer a cold, terrible death at sea on a magnificent adventure. On June 17th, under Secretary of State for Dominion Affairs, Geoffrey Shakespeare established the Children's Overseas Reception Board, CORB, to transfer British children to relatives abroad. PM Churchill and his cabinet authorized CORB to rescue as many children as possible from famine or death. The government would pay for most transportation, and schools and churches coordinated applications. CORB registered around 211,000 youngsters in 2 months, with one teacher and nurse per 15 children. CORB-numbered baggage and ID tags were supplied to travelers without passports. Relocation was transitory. Refugees would return home after the war. In August, 24,000 youngsters and 1,000 adult volunteers preparing to cross the sea. Canada would get the most, followed by Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. Others headed to America. Several maritime firms' ocean liners joined convoys at Liverpool and sailed west. Royal Navy vessels would accompany the ships. but parents were understandably worried for their children. The Royal Navy had to maximize its resources, with the home islands being prioritized due to hundreds of convoys at sea, 1,000 miles of coastline to monitor, and few experienced personnel. Bess Walder, 15, and her younger brother Louis were among the first Corps B children enrolled. Their parents, Bernard and Rosina Walder, followed European events since the Spanish Civil War. They boarded a train at Euston Station on September 9th with their modest luggage, and they arrived in Liverpool on September 11th. After a hurried meal, the youngsters were hustled down the streets to the docks, where convoy OB 213 ships were departing. The 1,935 launched 11 080-ton, 480-foot liner Queen of England to India ran, providing speed as her strongest protection against submarines. Bess, Louis, and Beth were taken to Canada, where they were greeted by their widowed mother and stewards. The ship departed for Quebec and Montreal on September 13th, with 191 passengers, 90 miners, and 216 officers and crew. The kids toured the ship, were instructed on their lifeboat station and how to put on the heavy lifebelts, and were given lifeboat exercises and ordered to sleep in lifebelts. OB 213's escorts were directed to join an oncoming convoy at 17 degrees longitude on September 17th. RAF claims of 180 German jets 2 days earlier only boosted the morale of the 18 surviving ship's passengers and staff. Mary Cornish, 41, found her 15 girls in her care at 8 p.m. and went to the lounge for coffee with friends. After 2 hours, they walked on deck when Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Bleichrodt, commanding Type 7B U-boat U-48, discovered OB 213 250 miles off Rockall, Ireland. A storm built, and by 11 p.m., a furious wind was sweeping rain over the deck. A Force 10 gale was coming. Bleichrodt, who would become infamous for his aggression, stalked the convoy and targeted the city of Benares, the biggest ship in the middle line. Bleichrodt launched 2 bow-tube torpedoes at 11:45 p.m., but both missed the ship and the lookouts missed them in the rough surf. 1 minute after midnight, Bleichrodt shot again, causing a portside torpedo to hit the city of Benares beneath the children's sleeping quarters. The frigid Atlantic surged in, and Cornish heard a tremendous thud, and the ship shook as she descended to the main deck. Torpedo struck when little Bess Walder slept. She woke up immediately, understanding what occurred. From the ship's rising list, the 3 berth chambers shook, and the closet door opened, spilling everything on the terrace. She attempted to rouse up the girl on the bottom bed, but didn't realize the danger. Fred Steels, 11, fell from his bed in one of the boys' quarters and was trapped behind a wardrobe. He escaped after hearing sirens. Burst pipes sprayed water in the sink, and the youngster shouted, "We're hit!" Paul Shearing left the bottom bunk, and the guys donned lifebelts. They left toward the corridor with another boy. Every step to the lifeboats was like climbing a mountain in an earthquake. When they reached the top deck, Steels observed a large smoldering hole and was thrown into a lifeboat by a nasty sailor. Colin Richardson heard the torpedo explode beneath his cabin while reading a penny book on his berth. Beth Cummings felt she was experiencing a horrible dream, but woke up to alarms and loud crashing noises and sought to switch on the light. It was then she saw the deck was tilted. Bess lost her younger brother Louis. In the hubbub, she had no idea where to locate him. The youngsters were attempting to reach the lifeboats as instructed, although the rehearsal had been done in daylight on calm seas without fear. They found a completely different boat deck than a few days ago. While filling and launching lifeboats, the ship lurched, swinging them violently on their davits. Some adults panicked, while others assisted the kids. Boat number 2 dropped Colin Richardson into the lake, while boat number 8 hit the ship's unyielding side on the port side. Nearly everyone on the boat was hurled into the water. 4 crewmen laboring hard to bail out of water-filled boat number 8 perished from the cold. The elderly nurse next to Colin became depressed and listless. Beth and Bess stayed together. The sailors hustled them into starboard boat number 5, which was overcrowded, and one of the final boats lowered. When it touched water, it was rapidly flooded. Then a big wave overturned it, throwing everyone into the water. Cornish cradled a little kid trembling in fright and cold as she watched men and people waving for aid and floating in their lifebelts. Many of the ship's passengers and crew had perished from the explosion, drowning or near freezing water. In the aftermath of World War II, the Royal Navy's Office of Western Approaches received a torpedo message from convoy OB-213 and ordered the eastbound destroyer HMS Hurricane to locate survivors in boats. Lieutenant Commander Crofton Sims ordered his ship to turn west and proceed towards the location. The weather was terrible, with a larger storm moving in, dispersing boats and having swimmers drink salt water as they weakened. Bess, Beth, and 10 other survivors attempted to ascend their wrecked boat, but their fingers were too numb. They were the only ones remaining when other hands slipped away. No food, water, or rescue was available. HMS Hurricane arrived mid-afternoon, and the crew prepared longboats, skiffs, blankets, and slings to lift survivors. The storm was intense, but fading, and rescuers halted beside the first boat, carrying only bodies. The storm reached boat number 11, carrying 20 wet survivors, becoming more afraid. Only 2 of 15 Corby kids survived, one being Lewis Walder. The survivors were carried into the destroyer's slings and ladders by powerful but loving hands, and they were escorted into warm, dry quarters by sailors who blanketed them and served hot tea. A physician treated them, and the kids slept in the officers' quarters. Only 8 individuals survived boat number 9, which carried 33. The upturned boat with Bess and Beth on the keel was found by the rescuers, and Bess was contacted by Navy coxswain Albert Gorman. She was contacted the following day, and she discovered that her brother Lewis was gone. One additional lifeboat, number 12, went missing when Hurricane sailed away. The storm dispersed the boats, and the big gray-green waves obscured the little ship. The days dragged, and the human freight weakened. A single RAF Short Sunderland flying boat sailed above about midday on the 7th day, but Cooper knew it saw them. 15 minutes later, another aircraft dropped supplies and a message of support. The warship HMS Anthony discovered the lifeboat on September 26th. The only siblings saved were Bess and Louis Walder. Certain families lost 2, 3, or 4 children, and 77 of the 90 Corb youngsters on the city of Benares died, with 77 aged 6 to 15. Artillery couldn't fire, tanks couldn't move, and its soldiers were better at painting than shooting. However, the Ghost Army, 1,100 American painters, designers, and sound engineers, staged ingenious ruses to confuse Nazi Germany about the location and quantity of Allied troops, winning World War II. 23rd Headquarters, Special Troops and 3,133rd Signal Company. Special members who physically practiced combat, rescued hundreds of American troops, and received one of the nation's highest civilian medals. The Ghost Army used inflatable decoys, phony radio chatter, and loudspeakers to mimic a force 30 times its size, as near as a quarter mile from the front lines. A U.S. Army study said, "Rarely, if ever, has there been a group of such a few men which had so great an influence on the outcome of a major military campaign." Ghost Army member Freddie Fox called his group a traveling roadshow that went up and down the front lines, impersonating the real fighting outfits. From D-Day until the Battle of the Bulge, the Ghost Army flew over 20 missions in Europe in 1944 and 1945. In January 1944, the U.S. Army developed the Ghost Army as a self-contained organization to perform visual, acoustic, and radio deception in time for D-Day, inspired by British subterfuge in North Africa. With a 119 average IQ, the Ghost Army's painters, admen, radio broadcasters, sound gurus, actors, architects, and set designers included fashion designer Bill Blass and painter Ellsworth Kelly. As its name implies, the Ghost Army operated at night. The Meriden Daily Journal reported on December 6, 1945, that camouflage specialists employed gasoline-powered air compressors to inflate rubber tanks, jeeps, vehicles, artillery, and aircraft with painted embellishments to fool Nazi aerial surveillance. Radio experts lied and copied operators' techniques to make their reports seem legitimate. Sound engineers played pre-recorded military maneuvers and motions on massive speakers that could be heard 15 miles away. During D-Day preparations in May 1944, most of the Ghost Army landed in England. 4 individuals participated in the Normandy invasion, while a 17-man platoon landed on Omaha Beach 8 days later to set up false artillery that attracted German fire. The Ghost Army placed 50 fake tanks and sound vehicles within a few hundred yards of the front line during the Siege of Brest in the summer of 1944, its first large-scale deception. In Operation Brittany, the Ghost Army hid General George Patton's Third Army from the Germans as it raced east across France. The Ghost Army helped Patton again in September 1944, when a gap appeared in his line during his advance on Metz. The illusionists maintained the hazardous line for 7 days, using inflatables and loudspeakers that played rumbling tanks, yelling troops, and sergeants ordering men to put out their cigarettes until a division came to repair the breach. The Ghost Army's radio deception distracted the Germans from Patton's rescue of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. Rick Beyer, co-author of The Ghost Army of World War II and producer and director of a 2013 documentary on the group, claimed Patton was one of their easier generals. Patton was quite kind and offered recommendations to improve the deception. He accepted their suggestions, he claims. In Operation Viersen in March 1945, the Ghost Army staged their biggest prank. To deflect German notice, the Ghost Army positioned itself 10 miles south of the designated landing area, while the 9th Army prepared to cross the Rhine River. The Ghost Army impersonated 2 divisions and 40,000 men to inflate 600 dummies and themselves. To make the 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions seem to be gathering, radio chatter propagated false rumors about their movements, and sonic vehicles played pontoon bridge building, artillery fire, and official swearing. The Ghost Army painted false division numbers and insignias on their vehicles, and built fake headquarters and command posts with fake commanders and generals. To alert German agents, they stitched fake shoulder patches onto their uniforms and boisterously shared their phony intelligence in local pubs and cafes. The trick worked. While the Nazis attacked the Ghost Army, the 9th Army crossed the Rhine easily. Woe II ended weeks later, ending the Ghost Army's purpose. Though they lied, the troops were brave. 3 members were killed and 30 injured, but the Ghost Army rescued 30,000 American personnel, according to military estimates. Ghost Army veterans came home to work in advertising, architecture, design, theater, art, fashion, and radio. Members were ordered to keep the Ghost Army's accomplishments a secret for decades to avoid deploying a comparable outfit against the Soviet Union, a new Cold War foe. After the war, a few Ghost Army publications passed by the censors, but the military did not declassify them until 1996. Beyer founded the organization Ghost Army Legacy Project, and a grassroots campaign for the Congressional Gold Medal to honor the Ghost Army. I was very conscious of the fact that these guys had not received any recognition because of secrecy and thought that was something due to them, Beyer adds. I thought what they did was remarkable, and I was amazed at their lack of World War II Pantheon status. 2 sonic deception operations against the Nazis in Italy by the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops and 3,133rd Signal Company Special earned the Congressional Gold Medal in February 2022 for their unique and highly distinguished service in conducting deception operations. According to Beyer, performance and art are not just things we do as recreation, they are a critical part of human endeavor. The Ghost Army saved lives with creativity and illusion. Dominican Hill in Baguio, Philippines, there is a building that has been abandoned and is now known as the Baguio City Heritage Hill and Nature Park. This edifice was originally and is still generally known as the Diplomat Hotel. With the assistance of a grant from the National Commission for Culture and the Arts in the amount of 15 million Philippine pesos, the local government began the process of restoration, which began in April of 2022. It has been renamed the Dominican Heritage Hill and Nature Park, which represents the whole of the site on which it is located. The stone crucifix that is located on the outside patio of the second floor of the hotel provides a vantage point from which one can enjoy a breathtaking panorama of the city. The American Friars of the Order of Preachers, together with a few Spanish members, made plans in 1911 for the building of a holiday home in Baguio for themselves and the nuns of their order. A vacation house would be located in Baguio. The building was designed by Far Roque Ruano, OP, who is also the architect of the main building on the present campus of the University of Santo Tomas. A member of the order, he was responsible for the design of the structure. Construction is supposed to have begun in 1913 and was overseen by Ruano himself. The site in question is a hill that is 17 hectares in size and was purchased from Americans who live in Baguio. In May of 1915, it was finally put into operation. An educational institution known as Colegio del Santísimo Rosario was established by the order in June of 1915 in order to take advantage of tax exemptions. However, owing to the very low number of students enrolled, the school was forced to dissolve 2 years later, and the building was restored back to its original purpose. Dominican Hill is the name given to the hill behind the building that houses the structure. The civilians who were escaping the Japanese during World War II took sanctuary behind its walls whenever they were in danger. During the invasion, Japanese soldiers took control of the property and transformed it into their headquarters. As a result, it became the last stronghold and garrison of the Japanese Imperial Army. Barbaric atrocities, were done in the location by their secret police, who were called as the Kempeitai. These acts included torturing, raping, and beheading priests, nuns, and refugees. While Japanese soldiers were committing suicide, American forces bombarded the location during the liberation of the Philippines in April 1945. The bombing caused a partial impact on the right side of the structure. Reconstruction work was done on the structure during the years 1945 and 1947. Because of its tragic past during World War II, the hotel is said to be haunted by restless spirits by those who believe in the paranormal. These individuals also consider the hotel to be a ghost magnet. It has been stated that there are apparitions and images taken inside the property, as well as phantom Japanese troops, headless nuns, disembodied weeping noises, moans, and screams, and apparitions in photographs taken as well. It was included on a number of television shows, including Magandang Gabi, Bayan's Halloween special from 2004, Aha, and Kapuso Mo, Jessica Soho's Halloween specials from 2016 and 2023.